The morning sky was a blanket of flat, indifferent gray, a perfect mirror for the emptiness in Clara's stomach. She rose slowly from the thin mattress on the floor, her body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. In the dim light of the small bare room, she first heard the soft, even breathing of her daughters, then the faint, unmistakable rumble of their hunger. Lily, the older one, stirred in her sleep, a small frown creasing her brow even in dreams. Clara stood, her movements careful not to wake them, and ran a damp cloth over her face. She opened the single cupboard in their tiny kitchenette. Nothing. A few grains of rice in an otherwise empty jar. The beans had run out 2 days ago, the sugar last week. Bread was a distant, almost forgotten luxury. She dressed her daughters with practiced care, pulling a faded but clean dress over Lily's head and adjusting a worn t-shirt on little Sophie. "Let's go for a little walk," she said, her voice a forced whisper of cheerfulness. She couldn't let them know there was nothing to eat. Children didn't need to carry the weight of the world. That was a mother's job. Outside, the cool Denver air was sharp. As they turned the corner, the warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread billowed out from the local bakery. It was a smell of comfort, of home, of everything they didn't have. Clara hesitated, her feet rooted to the cracked sidewalk. She looked up at the gray sky, then down at her daughters, whose small faces were turned towards the source of that wonderful smell. The hunger in their eyes was a physical pain, a knife twisting in her own gut. She had to do something. She took a deep breath, the scent of baking bread both a torment and a beacon, and pushed open the glass door. The bakery was simple but bright, the air warm and filled with life. A clean counter, busy employees, the clink of ceramic mugs. She approached a young woman with blonde hair behind the cash register, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Excuse me," Clara began, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wondering if I could possibly get 2 bread rolls. I can come back to pay you later this afternoon. It's just for them," she said, gesturing discreetly towards her daughters, who were peering through the glass door, their small hands pressed against it. The cashier looked her up and down, a slow, dismissive appraisal that took in her worn clothes and tired face. The woman's silence was a shout. Without a word, she gave a dry nod towards the back. A stout man in a white apron and a perpetually hurried expression emerged. "What's the problem?" "She's asking for credit," the cashier replied, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Clara tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I just wanted 2 rolls. I swear I'll come back with the money this afternoon." The manager cut her off, his voice cold and sharp. "This is a business, ma'am, not a charity. Please don't come back here with these kinds of requests." The words sliced through what little dignity Clara had left. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply nodded, held back the tears that burned behind her eyes, turned, and walked out. Her daughters ran to her, their faces full of confusion. The younger one, Sophie, asked the question that broke her heart. "Mommy, where's the bread?" Clara forced a smile, her eyes wet. "Let's go find a nice park to play in. How about that?" She needed to buy time, to think, and most of all, to prevent her daughters from feeling the sting of the humiliation that was consuming her. They walked for a few blocks, the world moving on around them, indifferent. Cars rushed by, people laughed on their phones. The aroma of coffee drifted from cafes. Their hunger, their sadness, was invisible. They reached a small park and sat on a wooden bench under the shade of a large oak tree. Clara hugged her girls close, stroking their hair, trying to project a calm she was far from feeling. But inside, she was broken. It wasn't just about the bread, it was about what it represented. The powerlessness of a mother who wanted to protect her children, but no longer had the means. As she held them, she didn't notice the man sitting across the park, a coffee cup in his hand. He was well-dressed, discreet, his presence almost blending into the morning bustle. His eyes, however, were fixed on the scene at the bench, as if something had pulled him out of his own world and into hers. Clara couldn't have seen him, and she certainly couldn't have imagined that his distant gaze carried more than just curiosity. It carried a past he tried to forget, and a present he would finally be unable to ignore. The sun began to break through the clouds, but for Clara, it made little difference. Sitting on that park bench, with Lily and Sophie beside her, the world felt suspended, caught between the gnawing emptiness in their stomachs and the heavy weight on her heart. The girls, with the beautiful resilience of childhood, were now playing with fallen leaves and small pebbles, their laughter a stark contrast to their mother's silent despair. But Clara knew. She knew that a child's smile can sometimes be a shield a pure attempt to protect their own mother from more pain. She looked around, her mind racing, searching for a solution. There were no relatives to call for help, no neighbors she felt she could burden. Her pride had been wounded enough for one morning. All that was left was to keep moving. She stood up slowly, her body feeling 100 years old, and called to her daughters. The three of them set off again, walking down the sidewalk. Lily, the older one, held her hand tightly. Sophie, the younger, skipped alongside, not fully understanding the gravity of her mother's silence. "Where are we going now, Mommy?" Lily asked, her eyes watchful. "We're just going for a walk, sweetheart. Getting some fresh air, okay?" Clara replied, forcing a lightness into her voice that felt like a lie. The path was uncertain. There was no plan, no destination, only movement as a refuge from the pain. They passed a playground with broken swings, then a group of ladies selling homemade sweets from a small table. Sophie's eyes lit up at the sight of a brightly colored lollipop. Clara swallowed hard, smiled at her daughter, and gently pulled her along. She didn't want them to feel another rejection. It was hard enough pretending that everything was fine. Meanwhile, a few yards away, back at the park they had just left, the man in the dark suit was still looking at the empty bench. His name was Elias Thorne, a tech entrepreneur, a man accustomed to numbers, figures, and boardrooms. He had everything money could buy, but he had long ago lost the things it couldn't. When he had seen Clara and her daughters earlier, something inside him had stirred. Memories he usually buried under expensive coffees and packed schedules came rushing back. His own mother had been like that once, alone, fighting for her two sons. She too had once asked for credit at a local store and had been humiliated. But back then, he had been too small to help. Now perhaps it was time to do what no one had done for them. He stood up calmly, noted the direction Clara had taken, and began to follow at a distance. He wasn't suspicious. He was respectful. He wanted to understand. He wanted to see the extent of this woman's courage. Clara and the girls were now sitting on another bench, this one under the shade of a larger tree. The mother was pretending to tell a story, her hands making animated gestures, and the younger daughter was laughing. Their stomachs were rumbling, but the sound was drowned out by a child's joy. It was then that Elias approached, slowly, without arrogance, a paper bag in his hand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and firm. "I saw you earlier. I don't mean to offend, but I brought this." He held out the bag. Clara looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and weariness, afraid of another humiliation. "It's just food," he said, sincerity in his eyes. "Fresh bread, some cheese pastries, and 2 juice boxes." "Thank you, sir, but I can't accept." She hesitated, but then she saw Sophie's hungry eyes and Lily's hopeful gaze. She took the bag with both hands, her voice a low whisper of gratitude. "You don't have to thank me," Elias said. "Sometimes you see things you can no longer ignore." The girls ate right there on the bench. The scent of the bread was now a comfort, not a torture. And Clara, between discreet tears, managed the first genuine smile of the day. Elias walked away, giving them their moment. But as he turned the corner, he made a promise to himself. That woman would not go through this again. Not while he had the strength to prevent it. The next day, the sky was clearer, the sun casting a hopeful light, but Clara still felt the clouds of uncertainty within her. Her daughters were asleep when she awoke. The empty paper bag from the mysterious man still sat on their small table, a tangible reminder of a stranger's kindness. It smelled faintly of bread, a scent she knew she would never forget. She didn't know who he was, his name, or if their encounter was a singular, fleeting moment of compassion in a world that had grown cold. But she knew one thing for certain. Someone had seen her pain and had not pretended she was invisible. That knowledge alone was a form of nourishment. Meanwhile, in a high-rise apartment a few neighborhoods away, Elias Thorne sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He was thinking about what he had seen, about what he had felt. The memory of his own past was vivid. His mother, Irene, had been a warrior. She had worked as a cleaner during the day and sold homemade candies at night, raising him and his brother almost entirely on her own. He remembered the day she had asked for credit at the local bakery, the same humiliation Clara had endured. He remembered the baker's cold, dismissive words, "This isn't a charity." That night, a young Elias had promised himself, "One day I'm going to buy this bakery." And he had. Years later, with his first tech company turning a profit, He bought it, not for the business, but for the satisfaction of taking it away from the man who had shamed his mother. But it was a hollow victory. Irene had already passed away, and the wounds of the past couldn't be healed with money. That was why, when he saw Clara with her daughters, he couldn't just turn away. He felt a pull, a sense of deferred responsibility. That morning he returned to the park, not with food, but with a purpose. He sat on the same bench, waiting, observing. He had almost given up when, in the distance, he saw the three of them walking down the sidewalk. The girls seemed cheerful, chatting and laughing. Clara still walked with a visible weight in her posture, but there was a new firmness to her step, a quiet pride, perhaps from the simple fact that she was there with her daughters, alive, clean, and with full stomachs. He stood up slowly and approached them. "Good morning," he said with a respectful smile. Clara recognized him immediately. "Good morning," she replied, unsure of how to act. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded. The girls ran off to play near the park's small slide. The sun lit up their faces, a silent testament to their resilience. "I was thinking about you yesterday," Elias began. "Not about what you lack, but about what you have in abundance." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "Strength, dignity, courage. That's what touched me. Most people see someone asking for bread and think, weakness. But I saw a mother trying to keep her two daughters standing. That's strength." Clara took a deep breath, swallowing the lump of emotion in her throat. "I don't usually ask for things I don't like it. But yesterday, I had no choice. And even then, you didn't ask for yourself. You asked for them." She looked down at her hands. "I used to be a seamstress," she said, her voice soft. "I made dresses, did alterations, even some costumes for the local theater. But I lost everything after my partner got sick and passed away. I couldn't keep up with the rent for my workshop. I had to start picking up odd jobs, cleaning houses when I could find the work. But it's not always steady." Elias listened in silence. This woman wasn't asking for pity. She was simply stating the facts of her life. "Do you still sew?" he asked. "I know how, yes. But it's been a while since I've touched a machine. My hands feel like they've forgotten." Elias looked at the ground, thoughtful. "I have a friend," he said. "He owns a small garment manufacturing business. He's been looking for someone trustworthy to help with the production of more delicate pieces, women's and children's clothing, things that require a careful touch. Would you be interested in an interview?" Clara stared at him surprised. "You would do that?" "It's not charity," he said, echoing the baker's cruel words but imbuing them with a new meaning. "It's an opportunity. I'm just connecting dots that life has placed in front of me. If you're willing, I can set it up for you today." She took a long time to answer. He could see the conflict in her eyes. Fear, shame, distrust, and a fragile flicker of hope. "I accept," she finally said, her eyes shining. "And what about the girls? I know a charter school in the area that takes great care of its students. No long waiting lists, no impossible paperwork, and they provide meals. I can speak with the director." Clara brought her hands to her face. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't fighting alone. Elias stood up calmly, took out a business card and handed it to her. "Call me later today and promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't give up again." She smiled, a small but grateful smile. "I promise." That day, when they returned to their small room, Clara was no longer just carrying the weight of hunger. She was carrying hope. 2 weeks later, the quiet hum of sewing machines filled the small workshop. Colorful fabrics were spread across the cutting tables, patterns were pinned to dress forms, and the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint smell of laundry detergent from newly washed textiles. Clara sat at one of the tables, her focus absolute as she guided a fine seam along the hem of a child's dress. At first, her hands had trembled, but now they moved with a steady confidence as if reawakening a part of herself she thought was lost forever. Beside her, the production manager, a patient and exacting older woman, watched with approval. "You have good hands, Clara," she said. "Detailed. That's what we need here." Clara smiled with humility. "It's been a long time since I've heard that." The work was demanding but fair. More importantly, it came with respect. No one there looked at her with disdain. No one treated her as if they were doing her a favor. She felt like she was part of something again, and that was priceless. That same morning, her daughters arrived happily at the charter school Elias had recommended. Lily made a friend in the first week. Sophie, the shyer one, spent her mornings drawing hearts and flowers in a notebook they called her morning journal. Under one of her drawings, she had written, "Today I ate bread," and Mommy smiled. Clara read it when she got home and cried in silence, as she did with everything. But this time, they were tears of relief. Elias, too, continued his routine. Meetings, decisions, investments, but with a different perspective. He would occasionally drive by the workshop without letting Clara see him, just to make sure everything was going well. On one of these drives, he saw her daughters running in the schoolyard. They were wearing clean uniforms, their hair was combed, and their eyes were bright. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, he felt he was truly doing something that mattered. On Friday of that week, the workshop organized a potluck lunch. It was simple: rice, beans, salad, and roasted chicken. But for Clara, it was a feast. It was the first communal meal she had shared with colleagues in years. She sat with the other women, laughed, told stories about her daughters, and when no one was looking, she wrapped a piece of French bread in a napkin. Later, she gave the bread to Sophie. "Why, Mommy?" "Because it's just a piece of bread," she said. "But to me, it represents everything we've overcome." That same day, Elias went to the workshop. He wanted to talk to Clara, to see for himself how she was doing. The manager smiled when she saw him. "She's over there in the corner, sewing a little blue dress that's turning out beautifully." He walked over. Clara looked up, and upon recognizing him, she stood. "Mr. Thorne, I don't even know what to say. I wanted to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't have to. The only thing I did was not turn my face away." She smiled, a calm, mature smile. "But you saw me, and that was everything." They stood in a comfortable silence for a few moments. "Your daughters are well?" he asked. "They're wonderful. They eat at school, they're learning, they have a place to play. And I'm not invisible anymore." He felt a pang in his chest. That one sentence said more than 1,000 words. "Clara," he began, "do you know what made me get up from that bench that day?" She looked at him with curiosity. "It wasn't because I saw my mother in you," he confessed. "My mother was also humiliated for asking for bread, and I was just a boy, too powerless to defend her. But today, I'm the man who can stop other women from going through that. And that day, when you walked out of that bakery, I understood that it was time for me to start." She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. In that handshake, there was gratitude, respect, recognition. No debt, no hierarchy. Just two human beings who, for a brief moment, had seen each other deeply. That night, sitting on the porch of the simple house she now rented, Clara watched her daughters sleep. They had full bellies and notebooks open on the floor, filled with scribbled stars and names. She held a cup of tea and thought about everything she had been through, from the bottom of the pit to the first step on the ladder, from the no at the bakery to the yes from a stranger. She thought about the mothers who were still hungry, the fathers who were still ignored, and she felt a calling in her heart. One day, she too would help someone, not with money, but with presence, with listening, with bread and courage. Months passed. Clara now had a small sewing machine at home, a gift from the workshop where she worked. During the day, she helped with the company's production. At night, she took on clients from the neighborhood, repairs, adjustments, baby clothes. Little by little, she was rebuilding her dignity with thread, fabric, and love. On the wall of her living room, among her daughter's drawings and handwritten prayers, was a newspaper clipping. In it, a simple photo. The park, the three of them on the bench. The article, signed by a local journalist, told the story of a woman who, after being humiliated for asking for bread, had restarted her life. She didn't ask for charity, she asked for hope. The subtitle read, "The article went viral, not for the pain, but for the strength." And a quote from Clara at the end of the piece touched thousands of hearts. "The world is full of people with full plates, but empty hearts. I just wanted to feed my daughters, but I ended up feeding the faith of someone who had everything but meaning." Elias read that sentence countless times, at home, in his office, on his phone. That woman, so simple and invisible to the world, had said what he had never been able to articulate. He began to make regular visits to the girls' school. Discreetly, he supported the library, the art projects, the community gardens. The director would say, "Mr. Thorne, you're changing the lives of so many people." And he would reply, "It's not me, it's Clara. I just needed to look." One morning at the school, Sophie was drawing with colored pencils. Elias was there, helping to carry boxes for the reading room, when she approached him with a folded piece of paper. "Uncle Eli, can I give you a drawing?" He laughed at the affectionate nickname and took the paper. It was simple. 4 hearts, 2 large, 2 small, and in the center, a loaf of bread. "It's beautiful, Sophie. What does it mean?" "It's our family," she said. "Mommy, me, and Lily. This one is you, and this is the bread you gave us, because that day we were very hungry." He swallowed hard. "But now," she added, "we have bread every day, and Mommy smiles." Elias couldn't reply. He just knelt and hugged her tightly. The following week, Clara was called for a meeting at the workshop. They were creating a new line of children's clothing and needed someone with a sensitive eye and practical experience with children. "We thought of you, Clara," the manager said, "because more than knowing how to sew, you know how to feel." Clara didn't know what to say. "Would you accept the position of coordinating this new line?" She took a few seconds to respond, but when she said yes, she felt the weight of a lifetime lift from her shoulders. Later that day, she and Elias met by chance at the park where it all began. It was empty. The bench where she had sat that day was still there, aged but firm. They looked at each other, smiled, and sat down side by side, like old acquaintances. "You know what I've realized, Clara?" Elias said, looking ahead. "We spend so much time accumulating, trying to fill our plates, our accounts, our closets, that we forget to look around. But that day I stopped, and you made me remember where I came from," she replied with a calm smile. "And you made me remember that there are still good people in the world." He shook his head. "No, I just gave back what someone once denied me. You taught me that even the smallest gesture can be a miracle in someone's life." Clara looked at the trees, swaying slowly in the wind, and said, "Sometimes life takes everything from us, just so we can understand the value of the little things. But when that little thing is given with love, it becomes everything." Elias looked at her with respect, not as a businessman, not as someone who had helped, but as someone who had been transformed. "Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Elias." They stood up. As she left the park, she took the hands of her daughters, who had just arrived from school. Elias watched the scene and thought, it wasn't about the bread. It was about seeing. It was about having the courage to do something when no one else would. And there, in that silent reunion, the story found its true meaning. Not in wealth, not in fame, but in restored dignity, in rekindled faith, and in the feeling that, although they came from different worlds, 2 paths had crossed for a greater reason. And perhaps with time, what began with a gesture of compassion could blossom into something neither of them expected. Because sometimes a simple gesture is what separates despair from hope, and it is also what brings together 2 hearts that life had almost let pass each other by.